I'm Heather McDonald. Heather, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Larry, it's always an honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
Heather, I'm sure you've seen the 2015 tape in which Bloomberg clumsily and unlawfully describes what Stop, Question, and Frisk really is. First of all, I want your reaction to that tape.
Well, one thing that's interesting is he gave these remarks at the Aspen Institute, which is about the most left-wing, mainstream elite institution in the country, without apparently provoking the hysteria that has now broken out. So it's a marker of how far left this country has moved. He was speaking inartfully, but the basic factual underpinnings of what he said with regards to the distribution of criminal victimization in New York City and the deterrent effect of proactive policing was true. And none of the people who were denouncing him for racism, and I deplore both Trump and his enablers and retinue that are using the racism charge against Bloomberg, none of them have offered facts to disprove what Bloomberg's core factual basis was.
I think, Heather, that Trump's argument would be, and I have no idea if he'd make this argument. I know I would make it if I were Trump. The reason I called Bloomberg racist is because Bloomberg simply suggested because you're a minority, because you're young, you can, quote, be thrown up against the wall, close quote. He never mentioned the magic words, reasonable suspicion. That's what I think prompted Trump to say what he said. At least that's how I would defend it if I were then called hypocritical, because, as you know, Trump supported Stop, Question, and Frisk.
Well, if he really meant that, obviously that is unacceptable, and that is making judgments about people on a completely outrageous ground. My guess is that he was using shorthand, and I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he does not deserve that benefit of the doubt, but that is not what the police were doing. They were not, there were millions of minority males in New York City. Only a fraction of those were stopped and questioned, and those stops occurred in crime hotspots, in shooting hotspots, driven by community demands to try and get the guns off the street. So I think what's most important here is the challenge to that very effective and very necessary police tactic, rather than dealing with, well, what was Bloomberg really getting at that point.
You point out in your column, Heather, that there was a 2018 study by the National Academy of Sciences, and they concluded that Stop, Question, and Frisk actually lowers crime. A criminologist you write about in 2015 found that the NYPD's use of the tactic had in fact deterred crime. And also the co-director of the Stanford Criminal Justice System pretty much said the same thing.
Well, and these are all leftists.
Right.
I mean, the Stanford professor is about as left as it gets, and I'm frankly amazed that he was quoted to that effect, but he certainly was. So, yes, obviously, Stop, Question, and Frisk, it is constitutional. I mean, that is one of the myths that have been put out there in the wake of Bloomberg's mayoralty, that somehow it has been ruled unconstitutional. That is simply not the case.
Right.
The judge who ruled that the NYPD's practice was unconstitutional was removed from the case for her outright bias. The ruling was a joke. She ignored clearly relevant facts. She excluded them from the courtroom, from the record. But it's constitutional. It needs to be used, as you say, Larry, with reasonable suspicion, with reasonable grounds. But officers, by and large, have those grounds. They're looking at behavior, they're looking at crime environment to temporarily ask a possibly criminal suspect a few questions. And if the suspect answers those questions in a way to allay the officer's suspicions, he's allowed to go on his way.
Right.
If he doesn't, the officer may frisk him and make further inquiries.
I'm talking to Heather McDonald. She's with the Manhattan Institute. Her new book is called The Diversity Delusion. Heather, you point out in your article, almost 97% of all the shootings in New York in 2018 were done by blacks or Hispanics.
That's a fact.
Whites are 34% of the city, but make up just 2.8% of the shooting suspects.
And how do we know this, Larry? Not from the allegedly racist police. We know this because that is what the victims of and witnesses to those shootings and homicides report to the police. And those victims and witnesses are themselves overwhelmingly black and Hispanic. So nobody with any shred of good faith can charge that those statistics are somehow the product of a racist criminal justice system.
Heather, we just have 30 seconds left or so. The other point that I think is pretty important in your article is that it is simply not true that black people as a whole hate stop and frisk. A substantial number of the people that put in place stop and frisk got reelected with black support.
Well, yes, Commissioner Kelly, Ray Kelly in New York, had huge black support at the end of his tenure during a apparent rise in stops. I have never been to a police community meeting in the inner city, nor have you, Larry, where you do not hear from those good, law-abiding people that they want the police to do more.
We've got to go here. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it.